Literally a full room on a late afternoon on a late July day. I think it speaks either of the quality of the audience or the quality of the presenter. In either case, we're delighted to have you. I'm Bob Hathaway. It's my good fortune to direct the Asia program here at the Wilson Center. As I'm quite sure I need not remind you, we are approaching the 10th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan back in 2001, which has resulted in the longest war in American history. What we frequently fail to remember is that the events since the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan 10 years ago represent only one chapter in Afghanistan's recent history of armed conflict. Today we look at the roots of conflict in Afghanistan and the ambiguous role played in that conflict by Pakistan, Afghanistan's far larger neighbor to the east. Our guide today will be Riaz Muhammad Khan, who spent nearly 4 decades in Pakistan's diplomatic service, reaching the very pinnacle of his profession, serving as Pakistan's ambassador in China, which is clearly one of the most important postings in the diplomatic service, and then during the pivotal years 2005 to 2008, serving as Pakistan's foreign secretary. Riaz's new book, Afghanistan and Pakistan, has just come off the presses, literally just come off the presses. I'm delighted to say much of it, or most of it, was written while he was the Wilson Center Pakistan Scholar here 2 years ago. This book looks at events in Afghanistan since the Soviet withdrawal in the late 1980s. Not surprisingly, it looks at these events through a Pakistani lens. Since Pakistan has played and no doubt will continue to play a leading role in Afghanistan, this Pakistani perspective can provide, and indeed the book does provide us with important insights as to why and how events have unfolded over the last 20 years, and maybe even where they're headed in the future. One of the things that I like about this book is it's more than simply a diplomatic or a political history. It is very much an intellectual history of Pakistan. Riaz has set out to explain why or explain the roots of the current intellectual and even ideological crisis that Pakistan faces today. A crisis that I would maintain, primarily because Riaz taught me this, a crisis that goes to the very heart of Pakistan's prospects in the future. It's always satisfying to help launch a book that's written at the Wilson Center, but it's particularly satisfying to host this launch because Riaz was such an esteemed member of the Wilson Center community when he was here in 2009, because I have learned to value not only his wisdom but also his friendship since I've gotten to know him. Riaz Khan is also uniquely qualified to write on the subject Afghanistan and Pakistan since he was a key Pakistani participant in Afghan events, not simply in recent years, but stretching all the way back to the years of the Soviet War. This is his second book on the wars in Afghanistan. Roughly 20 years ago, he wrote Untying the Afghan Knot, which is an account of negotiating the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in the 1980s. Riaz, I can only assume that there will be a third book about the eventual U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, assuming there is one. As you probably saw, and I hope as some of you took advantage of, we have a bookseller right outside the doors, so you can get a copy of this book on your way out. I've read the book, and I can wholeheartedly assure you that it is something that you will be interested in and ought to get at least one, if not 2 or 3 copies of. I need to acknowledge the support of and thank the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan. This is a group of Pakistani entrepreneurs who make it possible for us to bring a Pakistan scholar to the center every year. They also support other programming on Pakistan that we do here. 2 of the other volumes on the table right outside the door, and both of these are free, resulted from conferences that we held here under the sponsorship of the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan. Our most recent publication in this series looks at Pakistan's demographic challenges. There's another volume out there looking at trade issues involving Pakistan. To say they are free of charge, and I encourage you to grab a copy of each on your way out. The last thing, Riaz, before ending this overly long introduction, is I wanted to acknowledge in the audience Susan Johnson, who is not only Riaz's wife, but also is a very distinguished and senior career U.S. diplomat. I imagine there's been probably some interesting discussions around the breakfast table once or twice over the years. Susan, we're delighted to have you with us, and we thank you for sharing Riaz with us for 8 or 9 months. So, Riaz, I've gone on a great length. They didn't come to hear me, but to hear you, so I'm delighted to turn things over to you. That's all.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for a very generous introduction, and also introducing my wife here. She has a lot to do with this book, not just this book, but the earlier book. I don't think that if we did not, if we had not met, I don't think that any of these books would have been possible.
Well, then all of us, Susan, owe you a debt.
It's because of her that I was first wanted to have a sabbatical at the Georgetown University when I did the Untying the Afghan Knot, and then again over here when I did this book on Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I must thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for providing me with the opportunity to be able to write this study, and thanks to all other friends from the Asia program, and also Joe Brinley and Yamali Khan, who have been very, very helpful. And but for their efforts, I don't think this book would have seen the light of day. I would like to clarify a few things at the outset. This book deals with developments in Afghanistan since 1989 in a rather broad brush manner, and it blends my own experiences with the flow of events from that time, spanning the Mujahideen interregnum, then the rise of the Taliban, then the post 9/11 period. In that sense, this is partly a sequel to my earlier book, which basically covered period between 1979 and 89, the Soviet intervention. Other aspects of this study relate to an analysis of external interests as relevant to the Afghanistan situation, rise of extremism in Pakistan, and how the Afghan conflict and militancy in Pakistan have gotten intertwined, and an analysis of what I have described and what you mentioned, an intellectual or ideological confusion and crisis in Pakistan, particularly evident in the public discourse, and how clarity is critical for Pakistan to overcome the challenges that it faces. Secondly, I had completed this manuscript by the end of 2009. I have updated for the period of 2010, but there have been very important events during 2011. They are not reflected in the book, but they do not change the arguments which are presented in the book, the perspectives which are there. Thirdly, I would say that looking at various developments, I have tried to be as dispassionate as possible. I was not looking for villains and heroes in this episode stretching over 25 years. Nevertheless, it is not possible to escape value judgment, which per se is subjective, and basically it reflects my own personal prejudices and bias. The last chapter on conclusions offers views that suggest a way forward with regard to the objective of stabilization of Afghanistan, managing US-Pakistan relations that has been touched in the concluding chapter, Afghan-Pakistan relations, and some desirable adjustments in Pakistan's foreign relations. The canvas of the study, as I mentioned, is quite large, spreading over a quarter of a century. Besides the major themes of extremism and what I have discussed about Pakistan as case of an intellectual crisis and weak governance, on Afghanistan, the study discusses the missed opportunities for the international community to contain the Afghan conflict, complexity of the problems and issues which are involved, failings on the part of Pakistan, the United States, and the Afghan political leaders over this long period, including the present government. But here, for the purpose of this particular launch, I thought that I'll only focus on two points which have been discussed in this book, and which are also topical. The first is the issue of stabilization of Afghanistan and the related question of US military presence in that country, the process of reconciliation, and second point that I'll touch upon is the US-Pakistan relations. On any other issues, and there are many which have been basically discussed in this book, I'm sure there would be many questions, and I will try to give a response. May not be very satisfactory, but I'll try. Now, stabilization of Afghanistan. Now, quite clearly, the fact that nearly 150,000 coalition troops and a similar number of reconstituted Afghan army, and they all having incurred costs in lives, in the United States especially in terms of hundreds of billions of dollars of treasure, have not been able to neutralize an estimated force of about 20 to 30,000 Taliban fighters, shows that the problem is essentially political and cannot be resolved by military means alone. The book argues that the key lies in the success of the reconciliation process. This raises some basic questions. Reconciliation targeting whom? Or involving whom? Who can play the role in this reconciliation process? How should it be promoted, and how does it relate to the question of drawdown or the continued US military presence? So these are some of the questions which I'll also try, which I have tried to discuss in the book, but I'll also try to answer over here. The 2007 Joint Grand Jirga, a rather unique event, which basically comprised the Pashtun leaders from both sides of the border, and it was held in Kabul, had recommended, had suggested that for reconciliation there should be reaching out to the opposition, the mukhalifin, as they said. It was basically in Pashto, so mukhalifin, the opposition. What was the opposition? This was basically euphemism for the Afghan Taliban, or those who had rallied around Mullah Umar or Siraj Haqqani or Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. The book argues against the concerns which are often expressed that the Taliban can once again reassert control over Afghanistan once the US and the coalition forces withdraw. Taliban can keep Afghanistan or parts of it destabilized, but can never return to Kabul. The Taliban control of Kabul and much of Afghanistan became possible under most peculiar circumstances of total isolation and popular disgust with the domestic strife among the Mujahideen warlords. The Taliban campaigns, if you look at, and they have been discussed in this book, they were reminiscent of the medieval campaigns of Afghan strong men, with armies forming, disappearing, reconstituting, regrouping. That period is now gone for good because Taliban will remain under international focus and it will not be abandoned anymore like somehow it happened during the decade of the 1990s. There will be several international players who will remain there, even if United States were to withdraw, for which, of course, there are doubts, but I'm saying that even if they withdraw, then there would be many. There's the neighbors, there's Russia now, there's India, Pakistan is, of course, there, China. They all have interest. And that period will not revisit Afghanistan, the 1990s. In that sense, the book also argues that Taliban cannot be an asset for Pakistan, as they cannot control or destabilize Afghanistan. But they are a force. They are part of the Afghan political landscape. And this Pakistan always felt strongly about. Reconciliation, I would say, has become feasible only after the evolution in the US position on the Taliban, which is basically a development of the last, say, over 2 years. Lumping them together with Al-Qaeda had been a mistake. The US and Pakistani policies had a genuine disconnect on the question of Taliban. Pakistan could not have treated the Taliban the way it dealt with Al-Qaeda. This divergence has been the source of much distrust between the two countries, that is, United States and Pakistan. Now the question, who has the role in reconciliation? Again, I have argued here, but in my view, three principal parties have role for reconciliation. First and foremost, of course, the Afghan government. Second, the United States, and third, Pakistan. Why? The Afghan government, obviously, the process has to be Afghan-led. President Karzai has to be at the center of the process and seen by the Afghans as a credible leader. Accordingly, and the book argues this, the US official and media criticism has been in a way fortuitous for President Karzai. He should be seen as an independent actor, much like Nouri al-Maliki has been able to establish himself in Iraq much earlier than Karzai has been able to. The US, of course, with its military presence and wide-ranging engagement as an occupying power, has the obvious role. Pakistan's necessary role stems not from any special claim, but from demographics of the region. Pakistan is home to 3 times as many Pashtuns as those in Afghanistan, where they constitute about half the population. This is the reality that imparts unique complexity to the intertwined Pakistan-Afghanistan relations, in particular the traditions and interaction of tribal populations inhabiting the bordering regions of the 2 countries. In reviving and regrouping, the Taliban took advantage of 3 major factors. The Pashtun alienation and resentment that the US military intervention had dislodged Pashtuns from Kabul and marked a decline in their political fortunes. The book dwells on this, and the sentiment in Peshawar particularly was very ruffled at that time. The ethnic division and dissension, it's an old issue, and it has been subject of many books. Barnett Rubin has written quite a lot about it. Secondly, the US distraction with Iraq. This is what I'm saying, that the Taliban taking advantage of these factors. 1, alienation. 2nd, the US distraction with Iraq. Thirdly, failings of the Afghan government constituted under the Bonn process. And 4thly, the safe sanctuaries among millions of Afghan refugees living in Pakistan. Accordingly, there is a Pashtun dynamic to the Taliban revival. Pakistani political and military leadership, now I'm talking about the role, has to put pressure on the Taliban leaders to be reasonable in their demands and to desist from violence. There can be many modalities. The book doesn't go into the minutiae of how it can be done, but basically it does argue for an important assertive role of Pakistan to put pressure on the Taliban leadership. Each and every Taliban leader is not going to agree to a compromise, but pressure can make things move in the right direction. The effort will require close and frank interaction between the 3 parties, that is, Pakistan, United States, and the Afghan government, if it has to be pushed forward. And of course, this interaction has to involve the Taliban. In this context, the recent downturn in Pakistan-US relations is unfortunate and may well result in the loss of an opportunity, however slim that opportunity may be. But this opportunity, in my view, is still worthy of a concerted effort. Alternative is, of course, a protracted turmoil, continuation of conflict, which will peter out with time, because history is against all these phenomena, the elements like the Taliban, but the agony will prolong. The book discusses the question of conditions and modalities to push for reconciliation and economic inputs and incentives. The 3 parties working together can generate pressure on the Taliban leadership and also create enabling environment for traditional mechanisms such as local jirgas to operate for reduction of violence and reconciliation. This is like local ceasefires. The basic premise for the approach which the book has discussed include that there is tiredness with violence, but the motivation underpinning it persists, almost unabated. And that for Pakistan, the Taliban are no assets, and as a sovereign country, Pakistan cannot connive or allow the Taliban operations from its territory. And that the country's interests are best served by a stable Afghanistan. These are the basics on which, the fundamentals on which the book has made in the conclusion certain recommendations. There are many allied questions with the reconstitution of the Afghan army, etc., but I won't go into that. Now, the issue of drawdown. Military presence has a paradoxical consequence. On one hand, it appears to be necessary to weaken and debilitate Taliban strength and the insurgency. On the other hand, this very presence and military operations with collateral damage feed the insurgency, impart it legitimacy, and motivates fresh recruits for the Taliban. Therefore, this book has argued in favor of a clear policy on ending the military presence and for a clear roadmap for drawdown. Of course, President Obama's pronouncements on drawdown are quite lucid, that it will proceed as a schedule, and the deadline of 2014 that for handing over the Afghan forces the responsibility for active operations, and these statements, in my view, should be helpful. But this book has been written, as I said, in 2009 and 2010. Therefore, it doesn't anticipate these developments or these statements. Nevertheless, clear commitment to implement this schedule will help break the current standoff and allow the necessary adjustments in the Afghan situation for progress towards stabilization. The US military presence cannot be taken as a permanent feature on the Afghan political landscape. It remains an external factor, adding to imbalance in the situation rather than serving as a catalyst for stabilization. This, of course, has been argued. There are several other ideas. I won't go into those details, but the book discusses about an international or a UN initiative for security guarantees for Afghanistan, or even for an internationally guaranteed neutral status for the country. These ideas, in my view, do not address the heart of the conflict that has a domestic dynamic. Affected by political and ethnic divisions, dysfunction of governance, collapse of the national compact based on a web of tribal allegiances to the monarchy that ended with Sardar Dawood. Restoration of a similar compact is yet to be achieved. The political environment and dynamics of Afghanistan are not conducive to a modern construct such as neutrality and international security guarantees. But this does not imply that others in the region or other powers, they do not have a role. They have a role, like Pakistan, Iran, India. They have a role. Turkey, Saudi Arabia have a role, apart from the major powers. United States, of course, has a continuing role. And they can help stability and consolidation of Afghanistan, especially by assisting its economic revival. Afghanistan, of course, should freely develop its relations, especially for economic cooperation with other countries, including India. This has been argued. Pakistan cannot claim any special interests except for the valid expectation that Afghanistan's relations with other countries should neither be directed against nor at the expense of Pakistan. The book discusses in some detail Afghanistan-Pakistan relations and highlights the natural advantages that should give Pakistan the confidence that it will not face a conventional military threat on its northwestern borders, and that transit facilitation would not upset whatever benefit it draws as a neighbor for its trade with Afghanistan, and that a stable Afghanistan will be in the interest of Pakistan. The first point about the Afghan National Army, it is much debated that 250,000 Afghan army, what will it do? Will it be a threat to Pakistan? In Pakistan, it is being discussed. But the demographics, the terrain is such that it is not conceivable that there would be movement of regular armies, Afghanistan doing something against Pakistan. That is quite inconceivable. Whether this figure of 250,000 Afghan army is sustainable or not, that is also quite debatable, and that is touched upon in the book. Now, very briefly, U.S.-Pakistan relations, well, they have been described as transactional, episodic, dependent on expediency, that witnessed the high points and low points, high points during the early period of the Cold War when U.S. needed alliances and bases and Pakistan needed military assistance during the Afghan Jihad and then following 9/11. They suffered long periods of downturn. 65 to 79 was one period, although there was one brief period of tilt, famous tilt in 71, and the Pakistani role for U.S.-China relations. But then you had the other period from 1989 to 2001, when again it suffered sanctions. However, the book basically argues that this need not be a definitive fate for these relations. And it is important how the two countries managed to arrest further deterioration. Regardless of Afghanistan and war on terror, Pakistan remains an important country in the region. Developments in Pakistan impact on the region. Positive and cooperative relations between Pakistan and US are important for their mutual interest and for peace and development in the region. Under President Bush, there was some recognition that each downturn in the relations had been harmful to the interest of both the countries, and there was an effort to place them on a broader foundation, broad-based foundation. U.S. initiated a strategic dialogue, which it maintains with a number of other countries. This dialogue was upgraded in 2010. 5 areas were identified initially, which have now been expanded to about 10 areas. Then the assistance from the first package was $700 billion around for 5 years, and the second package has been doubled starting from 2009. Yet, the distrust continued to plague relations between the two countries. In Pakistan, anti-Americanism in public has been on the rise, and similarly, the American public has developed an increasingly negative view of Pakistan. The fact remains that despite official statements, the relations remain essentially tied to US interests in Afghanistan and fight against extremism and terrorism, and in that sense remains inherently vulnerable. This is what the book concludes. Inherently vulnerable to incidents such as, for example, the Faisal Shahzad incident. If, God forbid, he were to succeed in whatever he was doing, it could have had a terrible impact on the relations. The book discusses Pakistan's relations with the United States mainly as they concern Afghanistan conflict, because this is not a study of US-Pakistan relations per se. In the context of rise of extremism and the confused state of public discourse in Pakistan, the book analyzes impulses contributing to anti-Americanism in Pakistan while making the point that at policy level and among public, there is awareness that hostility with US will be quixotic and something that Pakistan cannot afford. There is this general feeling, despite all that is said about anti-Americanism, both in the government and also in the general public. But then there are the religious parties with their own arguments, etc. That's a separate issue, which again has been discussed in some detail. In the post-9/11 phase, the major policy disconnect had been over the Taliban. The US did not accept Pakistani disposition towards the Afghan Taliban and their leaders, many of whom found shelter in Pakistan and had mingled with the Afghan refugees in Balochistan and Pashtunkhwa. Pakistan did not and could not treat, as it has been argued, them like it did Al-Qaeda. The book does not deal with the Abbottabad operation, obviously, but if there are any questions, there was the other day explanations given by former President Musharraf. I was mentioning to Bob that within 1 week I was invited in Karachi to basically talk about that issue, and I am one who also believes that the Pakistani government or intelligence basically did not know about this. There are a lot of myths, like, for example, the initial reports was that he was living in a palatial complex in a garrison town. Abbottabad, by far, is not a garrison town. It has an academy. Secondly, the house is a nondescript kind of a house. Anyway, if there are, and Pakistan, incidentally, is one of those countries which are not very well documented. This house was also purchased by two companions of Osama. It must have been in their name, certainly, but who was living in the house, except nobody bothers. In Pakistan, if nobody bothers as to who is living in a house or how many people are living there, and then there are the traditions of parda, this, that, etc. Therefore, people usually do not. So he was able to escape the sites. Anyway, that's not something which has been touched. Now, Pakistan drew distinction between Al-Qaeda and Afghan Taliban, not because, as has been argued, Pakistan regarded Taliban as an asset, but it considered them as part of Afghan political landscape. Pakistan had suggested at the time of the Bonn process, initiation of the Bonn process, that some of the willing Taliban elements, they should be included, they should be made part of the process. But at that time, of course, United States was calling the shots, and Pakistan had completely lost its voice with regard to the Afghan affairs following 9/11. The evolution, as I had mentioned, the evolution in the US positions, in a way, is a partial validation of the position that Pakistan had taken at that time and had since maintained. However, as I said, that this disconnect has been at the heart of considerable misgivings. There were also linked irritants at the operational levels, such as on the Pakistan side, the non-availability of much needed equipment for rapid action, such as helicopters, night goggles. If I may mention to you that despite all the talk about these things, the helicopters, 6 helicopters were delivered, but only one was functional until 2007, until late 2007. And night goggles, then of course in 2008, the spare parts, etc., of those helicopters. So that all 6 became operational in 2008. And night goggles were also delivered at that time, but they are still counted after every 2 months or so. So this is the level of problems at the lower levels, and these things are very basic when you are asking some country for rapid deployments, rapid action, etc. But I'll come to one other point which is important. I would say that on fighting extremism, and in particular the threat posed by the Pakistani Taliban. Now, Pakistani Taliban is a very different category. We should never mix the two. Although the Pakistani Taliban, in terms of inspiration, have been dependent on the Afghan Taliban. But there is a distance, there is a difference between the two. And Pakistan has to overcome this challenge. Al-Qaeda I have discussed in detail, and of course, in degrading Al-Qaeda, Pakistan has played the major role, I would say. Most of the top leadership, be it Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Al-Libi or Zubaydah or Attash or Khaflan or Patek recently, Ramzi, all these people, they were basically captured or eliminated by Pakistan. And in the first year, 2002, almost in one hall, close to 250 Al-Qaeda elements, they were arrested, and they were handed over to the coalition. Anyway, on the question of the Pakistani Taliban, this is a challenge that Pakistan has to overcome. But in dealing with this challenge, Pakistan wants to deal with it in its own way, in terms of tactics, in terms of how to do it, because after all, there is this very strong argument that these Pakistani Taliban are Pakistani nationals. They are Pakistanis. So the avenue for some kind of peace deals should not be closed. And this was the consideration when the North Waziristan deal was struck. Even until now, there are many people who say that that deal fell apart because of the drone attacks, continuation of drone attacks. Right or wrong, but I'm saying that there is this sentiment, or there is this sentiment in Pakistan that much of the problem which Pakistan suffers, the violence in the tribal areas or the rest of Pakistan, is because of the US military intervention and the continuing US presence. So regardless of the merit of these arguments, the important point is the question of public opinion in Pakistan. And public opinion is critical in dealing with this challenge, in trying to address it. And this point clearly came out during the Swat operations. Earlier, the army could not really move, but once the public opinion changed, then they were able to move. It generated almost 2 million refugees, something for which no government could have really been able to explain that, but it was accepted because of the changed public opinion. This leads me to another aspect, which is the imbalance of expectations in this relationship between United States and Pakistan. And this imbalance has been during periods when the relationship has been apparently close. In a way, this is an old issue. The US is irked when it finds that Pakistan's behavior is out of step with its perceptions and expectations. The two glaring examples in the past has been Pakistan's policy adjustment in early 1960s to seek close relations with China. It rankled with United States at that time. And then following 1974, the Indian nuclear test, Pakistan's own pursuit of a nuclear option, that also. So Pakistan was out of step with the US expectations, and that rankled. On the other hand, the Pakistanis often resented that the US pays little heed to their views that they considered to be sound and showed few qualms in abandoning the erstwhile ally when its interests were served and the context of Pakistan's importance weakened. Why I call it an imbalance in expectations is because, on the one hand, Pakistan is too large to be expected to behave according to a US or any other power's design. And on the other hand, Pakistan ought to be realistic in dealing with a superpower and understand the dynamic of that superpower's interest and policies, especially in the transformed circumstances such as have developed following the collapse of the Soviet Union. So there is this imbalance on both sides, Pakistan on one and US. In this context, the book analyzes in some detail the question of the US aid. And it brings out this imbalance in expectations in a sharper relief. The Americans believe that despite providing $20 billion in aid, Pakistan proved to be an unreliable ally and has not delivered on fighting terrorism. In the Pakistani perception, first, the figure of 20 billion is questionable because the real assistance is the first package and the second package. The first package is around $4 billion, and the second package, the allocations, real allocations made, I'm not sure of the figure, but they are less than what was expected. But in any case, it is $7.5 billion over a period of 5 years. The around 12 billion figure, or more than that, is what is called coalition support funds. Now, this was a very poorly negotiated, on the part of Pakistan, a very poorly negotiated arrangement. There is no formal agreement, but this is an understanding. And this is reimbursements for deployments of forces in along the northwestern borders. Pakistan could have very easily negotiated payments for the 3 bases it gave or the transit facility that it gave, which was cost-free for United States and the coalition. Use of 3 bases and use of the transit facility. So, in my view, it was a failure. One thing I can say is that the Foreign Office was not involved. I learned it myself in early 2006 when there was some bickering going on between our headquarters and the DOD. And then the Foreign Office was asked that if we could also talk to the State Department. Anyway, the other things are the conditions which are laid down. For example, Kerry-Lugar Bill. Now, the detailed conditions which have been laid down, they appear to be in the public eye like a diktat. And they can easily be, they could have been very easily avoided and could have been couched in very general terms, because the fact remains that the day Pakistan loses democracy, we know this would be the end of the assistance program. Or the day there is determination that we are not fighting terrorism or extremism or whatever, again the same thing will happen. Or there something happens to our so-called now, because you will say it in those terms, the nuclear program, if our unilateral commitment to nuclear non-proliferation somehow the other is not kept, the assistance will disappear. But to bring this in the text of a bill in great details, this, in my view, was unnecessary, but it only fed the suspicions and created ill feeling, and it did not really serve the purpose for which the aid, the assistance was meant for. So these kinds of demands to do more, the drone attacks which result in collateral damage, etc., they basically distort Pakistan's public discourse and Pakistan's perceptions relating to the war on terror, and only strengthen the argument of those who say that this is not our war, this is not our fight, and this is something that we are carrying out at the behest of United States. Now, arguing all these, the book basically says that the US aid distorts expectations and therefore the relationship. Pakistan can do without the US assistance. What is, however, important, which is emphasized by this book, is that Pakistan should maintain positive and constructive relationship with the United States. And that, which means that there should be support in the IFIs and its international trade. Pakistan's, I don't want to go into these details, Pakistan's efforts regarding the access to market, etc., they also did not really lead to anywhere. They came to a dead end. So the other point which is relevant here is that even Pakistanis who are convinced of the need for close and cooperative relations with the United States feel that US fails to appreciate the complexity of the problems that Pakistan faces and the sacrifices that it continues to make and the huge costs that it has incurred in fighting extremist militancy, which partly has to do with the 3 decades of history of the region, including the Afghan jihad of the 1980s, when the US and Pakistan had partnership, and then the 1990s when the United States walked away from Afghanistan and imposed sanctions on Pakistan. Well, there are basically also many inherent weaknesses in this relationship, and one of the weaknesses is that even during the period when there was closeness, the interaction was mostly confined to the government and military and political leadership or civilian leadership. The interaction at the institutional levels, what I call the informal institutions of democracy and free market, like the media, like academia, like think tanks, like the financial institutions, that did not develop. And here I place blame with the Pakistani leadership, which basically did not have the perceptiveness to take advantage, like I see China is taking in other countries, when the relationship was close and those kinds of sinews could have been built for the relationship, because they are the ones that count for the strength of relations in these times. But again, the book argues that being a pivotal country in the region, judging from any measure, either the population or of conventional and unconventional military capability or from the viewpoint of countering extremism and religious militancy, positive and constructive relationship between Pakistan and United States are important for Pakistan and the region, Beyond Afghanistan, these relations have to be based on balanced expectations and understanding and appreciation of each other's concerns and sensitivities, and less driven by frustration and acrimony. They need to be premised on a bilateral context. Pakistan has to reconcile that its relations will take a second road to US relations with India. But it can develop an independent trajectory of mutually beneficial bilateral cooperation with the United States based on better understanding instead of US military, economic, and military aid and any false expectations. The book has discussed these aspects of the US-Pakistan relations in detail. I'll limit myself to these points because this book goes into this whole area of the intellectual crisis, the weakness of governance, etc. But the point that it makes is that to overcome the challenges that Pakistan faces, clarity is needed in public discourse to understand the nature of the challenge, about imperatives of progress and development, about the impulse of the modern times and the transformed post-Cold War world. Pakistan has the potential to make the change and reorient its policies and outlook. On a much larger scale, it has happened in the neighborhood in China, following a protracted ideological struggle over there. For Pakistan, it will be a long haul also. But this is a battle that Pakistan will have to fight largely on its own. Lastly, I would say that in attempting this study and presenting the analysis and arguments, the hope is that this will contribute to the ongoing debate in Pakistan in a positive manner. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Riaz. This is a rich, subtle, erudite set of arguments of which you've received just a flavor today. But I think you have a sense of why I believe, and many of us believe, that this is going to be a very important book. Let's get you into the conversation now. I wait until you're called upon, and wait until Joshua gets the microphone to you. If you will, since we have a lot of people here, and as I expect a lot of people who would like to ask something, if you would keep your comment or your question very brief. We'll start in the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm Richard Whittle. I'm a public policy scholar here at the Wilson Center. And I'll stand up so you can see me. And I'm working on a book about drones. And I don't know whether it's something that you address in your book, but I would be very interested in your thoughts on what role the U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan are playing in the war over there, whether they're effective at all. And I would be very interested in if you would explain the Pakistan government's attitude toward them, which seems to be two-edged, I would say. And I'm also wondering about the effect on that very important component of U.S.-Pakistan relations, Pakistani public opinion.
The public opinion?
Yes, sir.
Joshua, while Riaz is talking, you can bring the microphone down here.
Well, there is a section on drones in this book. There is a section on drones in this book, and basically I have traced the history how it all started. The initial understanding was not that drones should be used as a weapon, but basically for surveillance and for intelligence sharing. That was the purpose to start with. But then in 2006, first time the drones were used because as a weapon, because what happened that the Americans, they had some information that Zawahiri was present in Damadola area. So because he's such a high-value target, and one knew always that these two personalities, Osama bin Laden or Zawahiri, whenever the Americans would get any information, then they are not going to ask anyone else. They are going to act on their own. So the Americans, on their own, they fixed these Hellfire missiles and they attacked. Zawahiri, somehow the other was not there, or he had escaped. In the first incident which took place in January 2006, the Pakistanis were ill at ease trying to explain it. So they explained that this was a missile which came from somewhere, from across the border, etc. I think that gave the encouragement to the Americans that Pakistanis have acquiesced in this. And then came the second big incident, which was towards the later part of the year, when about 80 people were killed because a madrasa was hit. Again, the expectation was that Zawahiri was there. This time, unfortunately, the press statements which came from the military were that they were hit by them because they were extremists, etc. The next day, the media went and they started showing the parts of the American missile. And that created a great embarrassment to the Pakistani side. But again, it strengthened, in my view, the American premise that Pakistanis have acquiesced in this. Pakistanis did not acquiesce in one other thing, which was feet on the ground, boots on the ground, because they took very strong position when there was an incursion about 3 miles near the North Waziristan border, Jala Khel, and later on also. So that stopped. But drone attacks continued. Now, on drone attacks, there have been problems. Pakistanis did want that some of these extremists like Baitullah Mahsood, etc., they should be targeted by these drones because they were effective. But on the other hand, the collateral damage, the civilians who were killed, that was creating its own reaction within the public, and for Pakistan to accept it would be impossible. Then the problems aggravated from 2008 when the frequency of drone attacks really increased by many folds, because before 2008 there used to be very few infrequent sort of incidents which could be sort of glossed over by protest or etc. But then now the situation has been untenable for the government to defend it. At the same time, there are many who do say that these are very effective against some of the extremist elements. On the other hand, there are reports that the number of the extremists killed and the number of the civilians killed, there is such a imbalance that for one extremist kill you have dozens of civilians killed. So therefore there is this big debate on the drones. One other issue which is part of this is that the Americans, they wanted to expand the area of drone activity to include this. That Pakistan did not agree. It is confined, it is limited to the tribal areas. There were many other proposals which are there, they have been mentioned in the book, to overcome this problem where Pakistan could also have the ownership of for these attacks, that they are a joint operation. So the number of proposals were made, but nothing seems to have come out of it, because, as I said, that at the operational levels and in many other aspects, there has always been this distrust between the two sides. Drone technology, for example, we wanted joint operations, but it did not happen. The other was public opinion. Public opinion is critical. And I mentioned Swat operation. The army was unable to launch this operation, and basically it had stalled whatever it did in 2007, 2008. It stalled on that because of the concern that there would be public reaction, etc. And the political government at that time, they entered into negotiations with the Sufi Muhammad, and they struck a deal. It was fortuitous that the Taliban, they overreached themselves under Sufi Muhammad. First of all, he started attacking the entire Pakistani system, the democracy, the judiciary, etc., that they're all un-Islamic. So there was a reaction to that. Secondly, then these people, they entered Bunair area, which is south of Swat. Thirdly, there was this famous videotape of a girl being lashed as punishment for something. So all these things, they created such an uproar in the country. And Swat, mind you, is not North Waziristan and South Waziristan, about which most of the Pakistanis do not know much. Swat was an area where people used to go, and it was a tourist spot, etc. So there was a strong sort of reaction. Because of that reaction, not because of any sort of cajoling from outside by United States or coalition or anybody. No. Because of this, it became possible for the Pakistani military to take action, even risking the exodus of about 2 million refugees from Swat, because people accepted it, because the other thing was intolerable. So that is why public opinion in Pakistan is extremely important, and one of the main arguments that this book makes is that nothing ought to be done which distorts that public opinion, because it doesn't help the fight against extremism. It doesn't help Pakistan to overcome this challenge. Oh, public opinion is riled against drone attacks because they look at it, look at the collateral damage of the civilian kills. Because there are, of course, news that some elements, but nobody knows which element. They say this is just government propaganda. The extremist elements have been killed. Which extremist elements? Because there is collateral damage, and what gets highlighted is this, the civilian casualties.
Ziad and then Dennis.
And then one other point about this which I want to make. Sometimes the insensitivity of the timing. You take the Raymond Davis case, which was extremely embarrassing for Pakistan. And then finally, through ISI dealing and wheeling, whatever happened, the man was released. Next day, there was an attack in which 46 people were killed. This timing was very unfortunate. And I think I saw there was hardly any Pakistani paper which had not condemned this and had an editorial comment on this incident, which did not find even a mention in the American press. So you see, there is this disconnect also.
Ziad?
Ziad Al-Haddad, the former Director of Operations at the World Bank. First of all, on expectations, you certainly met our expectations for an excellent presentation and analysis. I look forward to reading your book in detail. I want to just touch upon three things which you said. Virtually trying to quote you, if I remember. First of all, you said Taliban are not an asset for Pakistan and must not be provided any shelter and so forth. Absolutely correct.
No, not shelter. There are operations across. Yes.
Absolutely.
I said.
Well, I agree with that entirely. Then you said that the military presence, and I'm talking primarily of Afghanistan here, has a dual effect, and the dual effect is obvious. It also instigates a breeding ground for further expansion of terrorist activity, if you like. And the third thing, most important from my perspective, was the economic revival. That's an absolutely essential thing. Now, I'm going to try to put these all together. There is a mood of withdrawal. And really, your analysis with your knowledge and perhaps perception about what's going to happen in the future and what's been happening in the past, to what extent is this withdrawal a function of the economic condition in the United States and other powers? We see the effects of major budget deficits and so forth. Or a realization that the dual effect of the strategy in the past has not quite played out the way that we expected, all of us expected. It's an important question because if it is more prompted on the former aspect, that is the economic banking financial crisis, then the economic assistance in Afghanistan after this point is not likely to be any great amount. So please, your perspective on this and what's likely to happen and what's prompted the current dialogue.
Pass it across to Dennis.
Well, it's really difficult to anticipate what will happen. I do believe that the economic factor is very important in these kinds of decisions, although when I first wrote about it, my friend Bob said that no, because I said that the drain on the resources, American resources, on the Iraq war and the Afghan war, Iraq war principally, had an impact on this shift from what the neocons were trying to change the world, etc., to bring a different system, nation building, to basically minimalist objectives in Iraq and also in Afghanistan. So economy is very fundamental in my view. I don't think that United States is going to literally walk away from the region. Afghanistan will need assistance, and I think they do deserve assistance. The one argument that I have made in this book is that Afghanistan was not the principal factor for the great transformation which occurred towards the end of 80s and early 90s, the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Afghanistan accelerated this process. And there are much evidence to that effect, and I have gone into that. So I have quotes from some of the Soviets also. I think Afghans deserve attention on the part of the international community. But then, apart from that attention, the question of stability in Afghanistan, reconciliation, etc., all that, it depends on the Afghans themselves, and partly, of course, on the other actors in the region who are in a position to sort of add to the turmoil, but they should try to contain this turmoil, contain the divisions and dissensions which already exist, because it is very easy to play Pashtun, non-Pashtun thing. And Pakistan made mistakes on this. And that is also described here in its policy in the 1990s. It made mistakes. It should not have stated publicly what it stated, that the Taliban should be able to have their control on Afghanistan, and then they will change from within. There would be a metamorphosis, etc. We had no business to be talking about that, because that meant political demise of Northern Alliance. Then later on, of course, Northern Alliance was the only the party which was on with the American intervention, which became handy, and that's why the mistakes which were made then after post 9/11, the Bonn process. Look at, for example, the reconstitution of the Afghan army, the initial phase. 70,000, most of them non-Pashtuns. The defense minister, the commander-in-chief, Bismillah Khan, defense minister Fahim, both Panshiris. And we know those areas, those regions. So there was this imbalance and ruffled Pashtun feelings, which were exploited by the Taliban. And of course, the Taliban do not represent all the Pashtuns, but they exploited this feeling of alienation. So now, in the current scenario, I personally don't think that that United States will walk away, but the principal responsibility will lie with the Afghans, with some of the other regional actors, and they should try to see that their interests lie in the stabilization. There is tiredness with violence, and here, again, the point that I was making, reconciliation process is important. And in this reconciliation, basically, if some elements of Taliban, under Pakistani pressure, etc., they can be associated with the process, that will be the beginning when we can see that light at the end of the tunnel.
Hope it's not an oncoming train. Dennis.
No. There have been many trains which have come and passed.
Riaz, I want to congratulate you on this very lucid presentation. I really look forward to tapping your book for updating my own book on U.S.-Pakistan relations. And I had one thing you didn't mention, and I'm curious whether it's in the book and what you think about it, is in terms of relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that's the role of Afghanistan's non-acceptance, non-formal acceptance of the Durand Line. Does that loom large in Pakistani eyes and thinking, or is that just an issue that's sort of out there and people talk about?
This has been discussed in good detail, I would say.
What's your
The Durand
feelings about
Line
it?
and the question, all these other things, the Pakistani notions of friendly government in Afghanistan, the question of strategic depth, etc., all that. They have been discussed. On Durand Line specifically. On Durand Line, if Pakistan expects that the Afghan leaders would ever legally accept the line, I think we have an illusion, or we are not realistic. There is a history, everybody knows that. On the other hand, for the Afghans, if they have not even been able to define what is the problem, what is it that they are talking about? So this is an issue which will stay, but for both governments, what they need to do is to accept it as a functional border. And as a functional border, it has worked, it has been effective, it has been operational. We have checkposts, they have checkposts. There is a commerce which is going on. There is, of course, this very peculiar situation of movement across the border, and at times, it is as large a movement as 30 to 50,000 tribesmen crossing the border every day. So this is a very peculiar situation. But then the thing is that both the countries, they have to basically accept that they have to live with a functional border. Pakistan should be quite easy because, after all, every map in the world shows Durand Line to be. And the Afghans should not be pushed, because when you will push them, then they will resist. Otherwise, there is an acquiescence. So I basically am one. You, maybe because you have such great scholarship on Pakistan and these affairs, the last bit in the Geneva Accords to be settled was not many issues that were discussed openly, and the question of interference and this and that. And even the question of government of national league. The last bit was a phrase on the question of border. Internationally recognized, international border, or what kind of border. And it took Mr. Shivernadze to visit Kabul on 6th of April, 1988. And then finally he made a request to Islamabad also from there, sitting. And there is a very fuzzy kind of a construction, which is there, part of Geneva. And that was the last bit which had to be fixed for the Geneva Accords.
Joshua, right to your left.
My name is Kami Bhatt. I write for the Pakistani Spectator. My question is about your saying that Pakistan could live without America. Are you talking about emotionally, or you are talking about economically? Economically, Pakistani army, after federal employees are paid, Pakistan has very little to left for the development of infrastructure. Psychologically, Pakistan always fled from Ayub to Bhutto. Even Bhutto offered Pakistan bases in Balochistan. Ayub was willing to do anything for America. And even they flirt with China and Russia just because it's like, if I want to go after a girl A, I would flirt with girl B to make her jealous. So Pakistani situation is like with America. Pakistani elite cannot live without America. So
No,
thanks.
I think you might have misunderstood. I never said Pakistan can live without United States. I said Pakistan can do without American assistance. But at the same time, I said that it is extremely important, it is very important that Pakistan should have good relations with United States. So please, this is all being recorded, you can check it. This is what I exactly said. So I hope that this, and you know, Pakistan has lived without US assistance for long periods of time. As I mentioned, that we came even under sanctions between 1989 to 2011, 12 years. There was no assistance, nothing of the sort. Then between 1965 to 1981, there was no assistance program for Pakistan. So we have lived for long periods of time without US assistance. But where we need the US understanding and I would say goodwill is, for example, we need IFI's assistance, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc. And everybody knows who calls the shots over there. It's United States of America. So basically, what I am saying is that it is important for Pakistan, for the region, to have good relations with United States. And I am also saying that these relations should have an independent trajectory, regardless of Afghanistan, regardless of India. They should have, and they can have an independent trajectory. And they should not be motivated by emotionalism, the very word that you used, by anger. It should not be. And I am sorry to say that you belong to the media, that media is also contributing to this anger on both sides. So the important thing is to have good relations, but not necessarily a relationship of assistance, which creates these distortions which I was mentioning in the public discourse over there and the public view over here.
There are a number of hands up, and I can only recognize one more person. But I bet you if you buy a book and bring it to Riaz to sign, while he's signing, you can ask him a question. There's a hand over here. We're going to go here for the last question.
Faribors Fatemi, the Oxfordshire Group. Thanks very much for your presentation, Foreign Minister. I wanted to ask you about one thing that you did not mention, and perhaps it's in your book, and that's Kashmir. As long as there's this conflict between India and Pakistan over Kashmir, can there ever be reconciliation in the area as long as Afghanistan is now being used by both parties to fight each other? Thank you.
Which parties? Pakistan?
Between Pakistan and India using Afghanistan as a proxy to fight over Kashmir?
Well, Kashmir naturally figures in any book which concerns Pakistan. So Kashmir certainly appears in this book also. And basically, when I am talking in this book towards, there is a segment on India itself. India, how its interests are related to Afghanistan. And in that context, of course, Pakistan also figures. There is a whole discussion on the question of the transit trade, overland transit through Pakistan, Indian trade to Afghanistan. And of course, Kashmir appears when there is this talk about first rise of extremism in Pakistan, because there are many of these militant groups who are linked to Kashmir. So Kashmir is very much there. The question as to Pakistan and India using Afghanistan as a proxy for Kashmir or battle for Kashmir. I would say that from Pakistan's point of view, let's take it from there. What kind of proxy war would it be? Basically, it is going to keep Afghanistan destabilized. And for 30 years, we have seen the consequences of that for Pakistan itself. And this book argues very strongly and quite extensively that a stable Afghanistan is in the interest of Pakistan. So if we have to fight this kind of a battle, basically we are doing something which is counter to our own interest. Secondly, by fighting in Afghanistan, how do we resolve Kashmir? There is no way. It is something like the other ridiculous but a seductive kind of concept which was called strategic depth in Pakistan. Some people, it's an absurd concept. What kind of depth do you have in the Northwest? Your whole security paradigm and security threat paradigm is vis-a-vis India. Now Lahore cannot be moved to Kabul. Lahore remains 15 kilometers away from the border. So what strategic depth? So similarly, a battle, proxy battle or otherwise, in Afghanistan will by no measure serve the interest of Pakistan in advancing a solution of Kashmir. Now, solution of Kashmir, naturally, that is not the subject of this book, but I have slightly touched upon it, I think, in one of the notes, because I had been personally involved with some of the efforts under Musharraf. I do believe that the two countries are quite capable of resolving this issue. I do maintain that none of the issues that is at the heart of problems between Pakistan and India is of an ideological nature. They are all of a political nature. And political issues, disputes, they are resolvable. Because if it is ideological, then, one party has to disappear. But that is not the case. And therefore, in this situation, again, on Kashmir, there can be way out. One other point that I have made in this book while discussing this particular aspect is that the post-Cold War situation has given rise to possibilities for out-of-the-box solutions. Because the straitjacket concepts of sovereignty have been weakened especially after the end of the Cold War and with the globalization sweeping across the world. So out-of-the-box solutions are possible. And hopefully the Pakistanis and the Indians can work out something. There is movement, because for addressing these issues, one other requirement is that there must be certain degree of normalcy in the relationship. If the normal diplomatic channels are dysfunctional or they are not operative, then nothing can move. So that is why there was this need to continue this this dialogue, which now the two sides have agreed to revive. In fact, I would like to just cite one thing, and that is a declaration, summit-level declaration between Pakistan and India of 16th April 2005. Since I was involved with that, I can recount it. There are two sentences in that declaration. One sentence is that peace process is irreversible. And the second sentence is there was an incident, attack on a bus, Srinagar to Muzaffarabad bus on the inaugural day, that acts of terrorism such as this will not be allowed to impede the peace process. The thought behind these two sentences in 2005 was that there would be incidents of terrorism. Pakistan cannot be expected to guarantee that nothing would happen. Pakistan cannot guarantee that nothing would happen in Europe or nothing would happen here or there or etc. I think this is an unrealistic and false expectation from Pakistan. Yes, Pakistan should be expected to do many things, which I have said that Pakistan, this is a major challenge for Pakistan, and what Pakistan needs and wants to deploy its own tactics and strategy to counter this challenge, and it will be a challenge which will be a long haul to overcome. So I am citing these two sentences because the anticipation that we have, but unfortunately then happens Mumbai. And after Mumbai, the dialogue came to a halt. So, but Kashmir certainly to this extent has been touched in this book.
Well, Riaz, warm thanks for a very interesting, very forceful presentation. Again, I urge you to get a copy of the book, and if you will now join me in expressing our appreciation to Riaz.